The studio lights flickered into life as the audience's applause swelled, readying for another electrifying episode of Real Time with Bill Maher. Bill stood center stage, polished, poised, and entirely ready for tonight's headline guest. After a flurry of monologue jokes, he shifted his tone, announcing, "Our guest tonight, a woman who's been both praised and panned across the globe. Please welcome Meghan Markle." She walked out calm yet confident, dressed in a sleek navy blazer. The applause was warm but tentative, like the opening scene at a formal gathering where everyone's waiting to see what happens next. The interview began with the expected antidotes: her recent work with mental health campaigns, her podcast's success, her charity efforts. Bill asked playful questions, light, probing, but respectful. Meghan answered with practiced grace. But around minute 10, the tone shifted. The polite patter gave way to a charged moment. Bill leaned forward. "Let's talk about this thing that's been making waves. Your comments about institutional racism in Hollywood. You went on a major streaming show and said it wasn't enough to just stop using the N-word. You said whiteness is embedded. That's a strong claim, Meghan. Care to explain?" Meghan hesitated just a moment, perhaps longer than usual. "The environment fosters a culture of comfort," she replied steadily, "not discomfort. And until discomfort becomes the norm, discomfort for those who've held power, the system won't change." Bill nodded, flanked by his trademark grin. "Fair point. But discomfort is not the same as systemic obstruction. Do you believe people are actively excluding others on purpose? Hollywood and beyond?" Her gaze engaged the camera directly. "I believe that when people don't see themselves included, when their experiences go unacknowledged, it's not always malicious, but it is powerful." Bill paused. He shifted again. "That's a big leap, from not seeing yourself included to being systemically excluded. Aren't you insulting a lot of good people by suggesting they're complicit in silence?" The edge sharpened. Meghan leaned forward, her voice measured yet firm. "Silence isn't neutral, Bill. It reinforces what isn't being changed. If people, especially influential people, don't speak up, they're still upholding a system that excludes." There was a moment of stillness, maybe 10 seconds. In political media, that can feel like a lifetime. Bill exhaled. "Let's talk specifics. You've been critical of Hollywood's portrayal of Black experiences. You called for more nuanced roles. But you work in Hollywood. Aren't you part of the same cycle you're criticizing?" The question stung, but not because it was unexpected, it was because of the intensity behind it. Meghan blinked, collected, and replied, "I left it. I opted out of the system because it wouldn't evolve fast enough. Now, I use my voice outside of the cycle to push it forward." Maher's face softened, but the conversation moved into new terrain. "You've said you fuel conversations from outside," he said. "But if you're outside, sheltered, how do you influence policy roles, casting, things you say are broken?" She paused, searching for the right words. "I influence them by shifting the conversation, by creating spaces that demand better. Those stories and decisions don't change overnight, but people do, one conversation at a time." Bill nodded again, but this time something tightened in his voice. "So, let me ask, you're here on my show with my audience. Why should they hear your version and not just dismiss it as a celebrity grievance?" Meghan's eyes flashed. "Because this isn't just a celebrity talking. It's a woman whose family history has been erased, whose experience has been sanitized to make audiences comfortable. And that sanitization is exactly the issue." The audience tensed. No laughter, no applause, the kind of silence that wasn't polite. It was expectant. Maher's next line landed heavily. "You're saying stories about your background were sanitized, but they were part of your rise. Weren't you allowed to adapt, like many immigrants or women, without being seen as a symbol?" Her answer echoed across the silence. "Adaptation isn't erasure, Bill. The difference is whether you hold the adaptation up to be something it isn't. I embraced opportunity, but I didn't give up my truth. That's authenticity, not symbolism." He sat up straighter. "I get that you see the emotional toll. But is it possible to expect recognition without alienating your largest audience block? Her jaw set. There's no change without discomfort. Bill exhaled and let out a short laugh. That's okay. But there has to be more than discomfort. How do you win people over who already feel alienated? Meghan stared for 3 long beats. You show up, you speak clearly, you deliver your truth. Not to manipulate, but to invite them to see more than a familiar story. That's bridge building. He nodded slowly. Bridge building with me? A beat. No, Meghan answered softly. Not with you. Not tonight. Because if you're the representative of the space I entered, it's not yet safe enough. Now the tension shifted in the audience. A few nervous coughs. The cameras lingered just a beat too long. Bill exhaled, pressed his hands together. Okay, he said quietly. If that's how it is, I guess we'll wrap. Meghan rose calmly. No dramatics. No raised voice. Just quiet resolve. She offered a measured nod. Thank you for listening. Bill wished her good night, but didn't meet her gaze. And the show went to commercial. The studio, a room that thrived on debate, was left stunned, brimming with unspoken questions. Meghan Markle stepped off the stage and into the backstage corridor of Real Time with Bill Maher, her expression unreadable. The buzz of stagehands, murmuring producers, and flickering monitors seemed to fade into the background. She wasn't storming off, but there was a palpable weight in her steps, one that came from knowing a line had been crossed on live television. Back in the green room, her publicist was already on the phone, likely coordinating damage control with their PR firm. We'll get ahead of it, the assistant whispered, unsure whether to offer comfort or stay silent. Meghan raised a hand to pause them. No spin, she said plainly. Let it air as it is. What Meghan didn't realize just yet was that the clash with Bill Maher was already viral. Before the credits of the episode had rolled, clips of their exchange were exploding across X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. The hashtags #MeghanOnMayor and #MaherMeltdown had entered trending territory, with public opinion sharply divided. Conservatives praised Maher for holding her accountable, while liberals debated whether he crossed a line into condescension. The heart of the internet was not unified, but it was certainly electrified. At the same time, Bill Maher was back in his dressing room, staring at a monitor as producers replayed the moment Meghan had softly but firmly said, "Not with you. Not tonight." He rubbed his face, not in regret, but in contemplation. You think she's going to blast us for this? A producer asked. No, Bill muttered. She won't need to. They'll do it for her. By morning, every political commentator from Joy Reid to Ben Shapiro had weighed in. Meghan's face appeared alongside captions like "The Duchess dismantles Maher" and "Too much wokeness for Maher's table." But it wasn't just pundits. Something different was happening, an undercurrent of voices that felt seen by the moment. Women of color, immigrants, trauma survivors, and even former Hollywood insiders began sharing stories echoing Meghan's experience. One viral tweet read, "You may not agree with Meghan Markle, but when she said, 'adaptation isn't erasure,' that hit deep." In response, the right-wing media machine revved into overdrive. Commentators on Fox News framed her as entitled, claiming she weaponized her identity to deflect criticism. Tucker Carlson ran a special segment titled "The Royal Victim Complex," mocking her past statements and replaying the interview with sarcastic voiceovers. But the real bombshell came days later. Leaked footage from a pre-show rehearsal revealed a very different tone between Meghan and Maher. In the footage, Meghan had shared that she hoped the discussion would challenge perceptions without turning into a spectacle. Maher had assured her, "This won't be a takedown. I'm not Piers Morgan." That clip reignited the firestorm. People questioned whether Maher had set a trap, luring her into a conversation under false pretenses only to flip the script on air. Meghan's team didn't comment on the leak. Instead, her next move was a surprise. She went on The Daily Show, now hosted by Roy Wood Jr., and calmly dissected the controversy. "I'm not here to cancel Bill Maher," she said. I'm here to say that if your platform gives people a voice, you have to respect the risk they take when they speak honestly. And if you decide mid-conversation that the discomfort is too much, maybe you're not ready for the dialogue you invited. The clip went viral again. Roy Wood leaned in and replied, "So you're saying Bill Maher didn't have the range?" The crowd laughed. Meghan smiled, but didn't say a word. Meanwhile, producers at Real Time were in crisis mode. The network hadn't seen this kind of backlash since the infamous 2001 Mark comments on 9/11's. Calls for apologies, rumors of sponsors backing out, letters from advocacy groups demanding accountability. Bill Maher did what he always does. He responded on air. "I invited Meghan Markle to the table," he said. "I thought we could have a real talk. Maybe I came off too sharp. Maybe she came in too guarded. But this show doesn't pander, and it doesn't pretend. If people don't like what was said, good. It means it hit something real." His audience applauded, but it felt more muted than usual. Behind the scenes, things were far from settled. A producer from Oprah Winfrey's network reached out to Meghan, suggesting a one-on-one special, not a redux of her explosive 2021 interview, but something new. Meghan declined. "Not again," she said. "Let the moment breathe." Instead, she used her own podcast to speak directly to her audience. "I didn't go on Bill Maher's show to prove anything," she said into the mic. "I went because I believed in the power of uncomfortable conversations. But when those conversations become contests of dominance, we lose the humanity in them." It was subtle, controlled, yet unmistakably firm. And then the true twist emerged. A whistleblower, a junior writer on Maher's team, anonymously leaked internal notes showing producers had flagged certain Meghan responses in rehearsal as potential softballs and suggested Maher pivot to more gotcha framing for ratings. The document contained one chilling sentence: "We need a viral moment." The outrage was immediate. Critics of Maher now had receipts. Meghan's instincts about the conversation being performative weren't just intuition, they were confirmed. Suddenly, the tide turned. Celebrities who'd previously remained neutral began posting their support for Meghan. Viola Davis, Ava DuVernay, Kerry Washington, even George Clooney weighed in, tweeting, "If you invite a guest to speak and ambush them for ratings, don't act surprised when the internet drags you." A petition demanding an apology gathered over 500,000 signatures in 3 days. Maher held his ground. "It's show business," he said on air. "I don't apologize for interviews being compelling." But in private, insiders said Maher was rattled. His producer team was divided. Ratings had surged, but for the wrong reasons. The show had become a flashpoint in the culture war once again, and not everyone at HBO was happy about it. Meghan, for her part, vanished from the public eye. No interviews, no statements, just silence. Until she posted a single Instagram story, a quote from the late Toni Morrison. "Definitions belong to the definers, not the defined." The aftermath of the Meghan Markle-Bill Maher clash didn't fade. It metastasized. By the end of the week, it had become a touchpoint in every major political podcast, radio hour, and panel discussion. Across the ideological spectrum, it was being dissected not just as a celebrity dust-up, but as a referendum on American discourse. Were media figures fostering real conversations, or just setting up cultural gladiator matches for clicks? In the eye of this storm stood Meghan Markle again, but this time, the narrative was different. Gone was the image of the wounded royal. In her place now stood someone more calculated, more resolute, and perhaps more dangerous to the carefully constructed media power dynamics she was challenging. Across morning shows and late-night segments, the discussion shifted. Had Maher finally met someone too sharp to be ridiculed? Or was Meghan simply executing a meticulously choreographed media strategy? Speculation flared when it was revealed that shortly before the interview, Meghan had consulted with a team of legal scholars and communications strategists. Some critics pounced on this as evidence she planned to bait Maher. Others saw it differently. as a woman protecting herself in a hostile media landscape. The revelations added fuel to the controversy. Even more surprising was the appearance of a former Mar guest, actress and activist Jamila Jamil, who posted a lengthy Instagram video saying, Bill loves women on his show until they outwit him. Then it's not a conversation, it's a cage match. She wasn't alone. Several former guests, including Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and academic Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, began revisiting their own contentious moments on Mar's show, threading them into a larger narrative about the illusion of open dialogue in spaces still controlled by older white male gatekeepers. As all of this unfolded, a storm was brewing elsewhere inside HBO. The network, wary of being caught in yet another public backlash, convened emergency PR meetings. Executives weren't debating whether the interview had gone wrong. They were assessing how much damage it might do to the brand. Maher had always been controversial, but this felt different. This wasn't an offensive joke or a poorly phrased monologue. This was a guest, framed as hostile for speaking her truth, and then ambushed under the guise of dialogue. And worse, she had proof. Sponsors began pulling ad placements from Maher's show for the upcoming quarter. Not all of them cited the Meghan incident, but the timing wasn't lost on anyone. Meanwhile, Meghan received a surprising call from a veteran journalist, Christiane Amanpour. It wasn't for a segment or headline. It was a private conversation. A warning, even. You've poked the bear, Amanpour allegedly told her. And the bear is old, male, and unforgiving. Yet rather than retreat, Meghan leaned into the moment. Quietly, strategically. She invited a group of young female journalists, mostly black and brown, to her Montecito estate for what insiders called a dialogue summit. There were no cameras, no transcripts. But those in attendance shared afterwards that Meghan was building something, not a new brand, but a new space for narrative ownership. A place where women weren't invited to be debated, but to define. In the days following that summit, an open letter appeared in The Atlantic, signed by over 300 female journalists, academics, artists, and public thinkers. Titled The Mic Was Never Yours, it critiqued the performative nature of many so-called liberal talk shows that touted diversity while resisting genuine power sharing. Maher, of course, didn't stay quiet. On his next show, he addressed the controversy again. This time, the tone was less smug and more defiant. Apparently, I invited the wrong duchess to the wrong table, he quipped. I thought I was doing an interview. Turns out, I was auditioning for cancellation. The audience laughed, but it felt hollow, like echoes in a nearly empty room. Then came the second leak. A different behind-the-scenes clip. This one, even more damning, showed Maher rehearsing a surprise question with producers. The question, aimed at Meghan's alleged hypocrisy in decrying fame while marrying into royalty, had clearly been framed not for substance, but for provocation. Meghan's camp remained silent, but her silence now spoke louder than any rebuttal. Instead, others spoke for her. Author Roxane Gay posted, "You can't invite a black woman to speak honestly, then punish her for not shrinking. What happened on Maher's stage is every conference room, every newsroom, every board meeting where our voice is tolerated until it threatens." The cultural moment evolved. Meghan was no longer just the center of controversy. She was the spark to a broader reckoning, one that extended beyond late-night television and into journalism, politics, and entertainment at large. Even Maher's longtime allies began to question his tactics. Jon Stewart, in an uncharacteristically pointed moment on the problem with Jon Stewart, said, "We say we want real conversations. But when they get too real, we accuse the other person of being difficult. That's not honesty, that's control." Behind closed doors, Maher reportedly pushed back hard on HBO execs who suggested he issue a statement of clarification. "I don't do apologies," he snapped. But HBO was in talks with other potential talent, younger, more diverse voices, and the network's patience was not infinite. Especially not as internal data showed Maher's demographic skewing increasingly narrow. In a stunning twist, rumors emerged that Netflix, ever opportunistic, had approached Meghan to host a new docu-conversation series titled Unscripted. It would focus on cross-generational dialogues, featuring guests from opposing ideological and cultural backgrounds. Meghan hadn't signed anything, but she wasn't saying no either. Meanwhile, supporters rallied around her not with fanfare, but with action. Young viewers launched a campaign called Reclaim the Mic, encouraging women to document moments they were silenced, mocked, or ambushed in media spaces. And Bill Maher? He doubled down. I've survived 9/11's blowback, cancel culture, and the Trump years, he declared. I'll survive this too. Maybe he would. But something had changed. For years, late-night liberalism had enjoyed immunity, able to punch in any direction under the banner of just asking questions. But now, people were asking, who gets to ask those questions? And what happens when the answer is sharper than expected? By the end of the month, HBO's top brass issued a carefully worded statement. We support free dialogue, even when it is uncomfortable. But we also recognize the importance of ensuring that all voices feel respected in that space. It was vague, non-committal, but it was also historic. The first time the network had ever publicly commented on Maher's editorial conduct. In the months that followed, viewership for real time slipped slightly. But more importantly, who was watching shifted. Maher retained his loyal base, but a growing segment of younger progressives tuned out entirely. They weren't just switching shows. They were switching platforms. And Meghan? She had disappeared again. Until one day, she tweeted, for the first time in over a year. It was just 3 words. Still, not silenced. If anyone thought the controversy would fade like just another media flare-up, they were wrong. What began as a chaotic late-night exchange between Meghan Markle and Bill Maher had spiraled into a national conversation. It wasn't just about her or him. It was about the entire media ecosystem, who it protects, who it exploits, and who it silences. Weeks after the infamous interview, Maher's studio was unusually quiet. Ratings hadn't plummeted, but the show's energy had undeniably shifted. Longtime viewers noticed a strange tension in Maher's monologues. They weren't quite as punchy, not quite as fearless. And the guests? They seemed more cautious, more rehearsed, as though acutely aware of the viral potential of every offhand remark. Meanwhile, Meghan had gone dark again. Her team issued no statements. She didn't appear on social media. There were no paparazzi shots, no new projects announced. It was as if she had disappeared. But behind the scenes, she was working. Quietly, strategically, Meghan was assembling a new platform. Not just for herself, but for voices like hers that had been sidelined, misrepresented, or dismissed. And she wasn't doing it alone. Former news anchors, disillusioned journalists, professors, and digital creators were brought into what one insider described as a media collective with a conscience. The aim? To tell stories mainstream platforms wouldn't touch, with nuance, with context, and without gatekeeping. One former CNN producer described it bluntly. This isn't a talk show. It's a reclamation. The idea had momentum. So much so that Apple TV Plus and Amazon Studios began circling, offering development deals. But Meghan wasn't rushing. If this thing was going to carry her name, it had to represent more than just revenge against late-night theatrics. It had to stand for the kind of dialogue that couldn't be edited into sound bites. Meanwhile, back at HBO, Bill Maher faced a reckoning of a different kind. The network's internal review had concluded. While Maher wasn't found in violation of any policy, the recommendations were clear. Changes needed to be made in the guest selection process, in moderation practices, and in tone. Maher was livid. He ranted on air the following Friday. Now I need a chaperone to have a conversation? Are we doing late night or kindergarten? The audience laughed, but it was nervous laughter. The kind you hear when the joke hits a little too close to reality. Behind the scenes, HBO executives began hedging their bets. New segments were greenlit for digital-first platforms. Younger voices, more diverse guests. It was a slow pivot, but a pivot nonetheless. Maher's seat, once untouchable, no longer felt so permanent. And yet, despite the chaos, it was Meghan who had the final say. Without fanfare or promo, she appeared as a surprise guest on The Daily Show, now hosted by Jordan Klepper. The crowd erupted. She wasn't there to promote anything. She wasn't selling a book. She just wanted to talk. "I didn't come here to drag Bill," she said early in the interview. "He's one voice in a much bigger system. But when you walk into a space and realize your existence is treated like a provocation, you have to ask what kind of conversation we're really having." Klepper, known for his sharp wit, handled it masterfully. "You think you caught him off guard?" "No," Meghan smiled. "I think he walked in with his guard up. I just didn't flinch." That clip, just 13 seconds long, went viral. Over 80 million views in 48 hours. Hashtags like #unflinching and #MeghanUnedited flooded social platforms. She hadn't launched a brand. She became one. The next week, HBO's PR team released a statement. "We continue to support diverse voices and honest discourse, and we are committed to evolving how those conversations happen." Maher responded on his podcast. "If you evolve too much, you disappear." But even some of his longtime supporters weren't so sure anymore. Publications that once praised him for his unfiltered realness began to question whether that filter had always been aimed at the same targets. Satire, after all, is only effective when it punches up. As this debate consumed media circles, Meghan kept moving forward. She launched a foundation, Mike Space. Its mission? To amplify underrepresented storytellers in film, audio, and journalism. Within weeks, it had raised $10 million in private funding, with contributors ranging from high-profile celebrities to everyday donors who saw in Meghan not just a former duchess, but a disruptor. She also released a special edition podcast episode titled "What I Didn't Say on Set." In it, she calmly walked listeners through the experience, unedited, unscripted. She spoke of the microaggressions, the media framing, the mental preparation she had to undergo just to speak freely, and the cost of that freedom. One moment stood out. "I walked onto that stage thinking we might disagree. I didn't expect to be erased mid-sentence." The rawness of her voice, the pause before each phrase, it connected. This wasn't just about Maher. It was about the culture that enabled him, and the audience that laughed along, even when the joke wasn't funny. In a year defined by political unrest, media upheaval, and social fragmentation, the Maher-Meghan incident became something more than a tabloid headline. It became a mirror showing us what we tolerate, who we protect, and how much we're willing to listen before shutting someone down. In the final twist, Maher's own show began opening each episode with a disclaimer. "The following content represents the opinions of its participants. Viewer discretion is advised." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. Something had shifted. The audience had changed, and the age of unchecked commentary under the guise of satire was beginning to fray. As for Meghan, she stood at the edge of a new chapter, no longer defined by a royal title or by the controversies that followed it. She wasn't kicked off. She walked off. And this time, she didn't look back.